Hello everyone and welcome to Chapter 18, and we're going to be talking about global climate change in this chapter. So what we're going to be continuing with is, since we've already been talking about climate, we're going to look at the Earth's climate system and human influences and how those influences can affect the atmosphere and the climate. We're going to look at methods of climate research, and then we're going to consider the trends and impacts of global climate change, and then ways that we can respond to that change. All right, so here's a funny little picture here of some scientists that are underwater, obviously, and they are signing documents for climate change, helping to pass a bill. And of course, this was all done kind of tongue-in-cheek to be a little bit funny. Okay, one of the issues that we're going to take into consideration in this chapter is rising sea levels. And this is concerning because the rising sea levels are going to actually change the topography of our world as we know it. And one of the areas that your book takes a look at is Maldives, which is a set of islands that are right off of India in the Indian Ocean. And based on what we have seen in the past 20th century, our world's oceans have risen about 48 inches in depth because of the warming temperatures that have happened and the melting and the polar ice and the discharge that is happening as a result of our glacier melts that's happening. Maldives is significant to the effect of this melting because they're only about 8 feet above sea level anyhow. So when you get a significant rise, we could lose these islands. They could be underwater. So one of the concerns is that the higher seas are expected to flood Maldives, and this is projected by the year 2100 that it's going to rise another 7 to 23 inches. And since this is only 8 feet above sea level, it's going to have a major impact on the island. The salt water alone is going to contaminate any drinking water. It's going to erode any beaches. The coral reefs, okay, you can tell I'm in school with this. The coral reefs are going to be impacted because they're going to be submerged much deeper under the water. Not as much light is going to be able to penetrate. The islands may be small, they may seem to be very insignificant, but they are responsible for life and people living there and thriving and success on those islands. So in 2009, President Nasheed put on scuba gear and he decided to dive into the blue waters off of the island and lagoon to see what the conditions were like, and then he and his cabinet held the first underwater cabinet meeting. That was the picture that you saw before that. It was part of a campaign to draw global attention to the impacts of climate change. There were other talks that were going on at the time. Copenhagen and the United States and China and India were all involved, in some other major polluting nations that decided to come together to unite their efforts to reduce emissions and gases that were responsible for warming the climate. In 2012, the president of the nation was dramatically elected president and was forced from power at gunpoint, and the vice president was installed in his place. And Nasheed's supporters called it a coup d'etat, saying that he abused his power and was illegally imprisoning the nation's chief judge. So much political turmoil went on within this nation, and what they had started to protect it kind of went by the wayside. But put into motion as a result of Nasheed was the plan for carbon neutrality and voluntary taxes on tourists that could help fund the carbon offset and investments in renewable energy. Maldives is just one example of Maldives is just one example of one of the island nations that is impacted by this increase in water levels. The Galapagos, Fijis, and other islands similar to those are also suffering the same impact. We're also going to see, as sea levels rise, storm damage from these rising sea levels are going to be much more severe and extreme. Think of what we saw with Katrina and Sandy in those situations. So we really have to take a look and focus on climate and why climate change is happening. Okay, so continuing with the idea of the rising seas and Maldives. Maldives is a very popular tourist attraction. Many tourists see this as a paradise. We talked about the seas rising due to global climate change, and yes, it could submerge them. They're already seeing eroded beaches. Storms are causing flooding in areas that didn't flood before. There's damage happening to the coral reefs in the area. One, they're being submerged into deeper waters, and the photic zones are being changed. So that's impacting any organisms that rely on light for photosynthesis. When a storm happens, they wind up having to evacuate people that live in the lowest lying areas of the island to higher land in order for them to be able to survive the storm. And because this is such a small nation, it's suffering the most from the climate change because it is threatened the most by the climate change. So we saw this picture already, and we have an idea where it's located. So let's take a look at what climate change is. And climate change is just simply conditions are no longer staying within the norms as they have been over the years. And we know the difference between weather and climate, and weather is our day by day. Climate is the year-round conditions, and our climate is changing. Temperature is increasing at least 1 to 2 degrees Celsius within a 50-year span. 1 to 2 degrees Celsius doesn't seem like a lot, but we're talking about 4 to 5 to 6 degrees Fahrenheit. So in terms of 32 degrees being freezing, and I keep going back to this mental image, then if you are 37 degrees, if you are 40 degrees, then that's melting, so that's significant. As temperatures goes up, it changes the distribution of moisture around the world. We discussed this in class where in one area they might be seeing an increase in rain, but another area they might be seeing drought. So where people will say global climate change isn't happening because it's raining and we're getting all of this water here, we have to consider the whole picture of the earth. And there's areas that are drought-ridden because one area is getting more rain than the others. Wind, it's going to change in the wind, the heating and cooling patterns. Hot air, as we know, rises, cold air sinks, and the faster it warms, the faster it cools, the higher the winds. And if these winds are occurring over warm, moist waters, it's going to pick up precipitation. So this is where we get our weather from, those short-term conditions that are very localized. And we can't confuse weather with global climate change, because the climate change describes the trends and variations within the Earth's climate. Now, one of the things that we've been able to do is associate the amount of carbon dioxide production with the amount of temperature. So we have gone back into our geological history, and we've dug into the core sampling of the Earth and into ice samples, and we have seen that carbon dioxide has changed in amounts throughout the Earth's history. And there's a direct correlation that when carbon dioxide emissions go up, temperatures go up. And where there's less carbon dioxide that is being produced, then the temperatures go down. So we can see this correlation and this relationship to what is produced as far as our carbon dioxide cycle is concerned. Global warming and climate change are not the same, and it's important that you know the difference between the two. Global warming is just the increase in the Earth's average temperature, and that's only one part of climate change. So as I said, we're increasing about 1 to 2 degrees Celsius in the past, in we'll say the last century, but that's just global warming. We're looking at the temperature increase. Climate change is the change in the amounts of precipitation as well as the temperatures that are happening globally, not just within one area. And we've already discussed that the Earth's climate has varied very naturally throughout time because of the amount of carbon dioxide that is present. But our fossil fuel combustion and our deforestation today is increasing the rate of this change exponentially. So we need to understand climate change, what it requires, and we need to understand how our planet works in order to be able to come up with effective ways of slowing down this climate change. So there's 3 factors that influence climate, and one of those, hopefully you're saying, Mrs. Saunders, sun, and that's it. We know that the sun hits at different angles and heats the Earth unevenly, so that is going to be one of the contributing factors. We know that it regulates the temperature. Without the sun, we would be much colder. We would be probably at freezing or below freezing. So that and our oceans and the land, which store and they transport the heat and moisture, they influence our climate. So the sun gives us most of our energy. The atmosphere is where our water is absorbed, and the incoming solar radiation is reflected. And we're also going to absorb energy in powers that come from the wind and the waves and the cycles, the nutrient cycles, evaporation and photosynthesis. So let's take a look at this graphic, and we can see that sunlight is going to come in. It's going to be absorbed by the surface water. Remember, that's about 200 meters deep that water is able to penetrate and absorb, and you're talking about that expanse across the entire ocean. And remembering that at the equators, much more direct sunlight, so you're going to be absorbing so much more. And typically at the poles, because of the snow and the ice reflecting some of that, about 30% of the energy is reflected back from the surface that comes down, that's absorbed. Our Earth can also store thermal energy as well, and as it heats up, it's going to be putting warmer air up into the atmosphere, and the further away it gets, the cooler, and it'll come back down. So this is the way that we're going to get the heating and the cooling of the Earth's surface through that thermal energy. All right, we're 14 minutes in. We'll talk about greenhouse gases on our next screencast.